Okay, we're going to be talking today about stability strategies. And also, we're going to be looking at retrenchment strategies and as well, two positioning matrices, the BCG matrix and the GE McKinsey matrix. That's what we're going to be looking at in today's lecture. So let's start off with stability strategies. Now, typically with stability strategies, they are short term. You're going to be trying to follow a strategy that is going to be looking at maybe consolidating the growth that your firm has just gone through and trying to let that growth seep into or permeate into that new corporate culture, especially if this was an acquisition or a merger. So let's take a look at a couple of these different types of stability strategies. First one is a pause strategy. And as mentioned, the pause strategy then would be one that would be used after a firm has gone through an aggressive growth, merger or an acquisition. And the firm would then kind of pause, let that change of that new corporate culture kind of solidify between the two of them. And then from that, then they would move forward. Moving on to the second one, it's a proceed with caution. And we talked a little bit about a proceed with caution strategy. Most typically, this type of stability strategy is used when firms are considering going internationally, and they're not quite certain about the conditions of that country in which they're entering. Maybe it's the political or economic or whatever those conditions might be, the market conditions, the competitive conditions, the infrastructure that might be there, whether or not it's going to support their activities. So they would enter with a proceed with caution approach. And this is also considered a stability type of strategy. Third one, the no change strategy. And simply a no change strategy is just that. The strategy that the firm has does not need to be changed. They are in an environment that is stable. There is no threat from competitors. There's no economic disturbance. There's no changes to their strengths and weaknesses, and they're comfortable with the profit and the margins and the revenue and the market share that they have. So a no change strategy then is just that. Moving on to retrenchment strategies. Now with a retrenchment strategy, now we're looking at a firm that needs to consolidate its strategic efforts. And it needs to take those resources and capabilities and apply them in other areas of that firm that can have growth potential. So the importance of this retrenchment strategy then is to reduce the size, diversity, expenditures of that organization in order for it to become more financially stable. Now, this typically is withdrawing from markets, selling certain products. I got some examples here. We got General Motors. They stopped making several of their product lines, the Saturn, the Oldsmobile, Pontiac, and Hummer. And they divested from those different brands. They actually sold Hummer off, but they stopped making the other three. Target is another example of a firm that went through divestment and, retrenchment. When they pulled back out of Canada, they had entered into the Canadian market and found that the Canadian market was not receptive to them. So then they had to retrench and pull back out of the Canadian market. So let's take a look at the different strategies that come under retrenchment. And the first thing we're going to be looking at is actually turnaround, whether or not a firm is viable for a turnaround. So we're going to look at turnaround. We're going to look at captive company, divestment, bankruptcy, and liquidation. All right, with a turnaround strategy, it focuses on backing out or retreating from a decision that's been wrongly made earlier, transforming that company from a loss-making company into a profit-making company. There are some characteristics, some red flags, if you would, of firms that would be in need of a turnaround. One would be revenues that don't cover costs. Second one is the inability to pay creditors. layoffs, salary cuts for officers, significant decline in stock price. Attrition rate of the employees is high. Poor quality of functional management. Market share continues to decline. The products and services that the firm offers are no longer competitive, and overall poor management. Now, these conditions could be caused by social, technological, or competitive changes in that marketplace. And that consumer out there then perceives that those products or services are subpar. Take a look at some of the steps in a turnaround. First of all, what we need to do is we have to assess whether or not that firm is viable for a turnaround to see whether or not it can be saved. So there's going to be a high level investigation of that business situation. Then we're going to look at the cause of the situation. We're going to look at whether or not there's potential solutions to that problem. We're going to look at management capabilities of that problem and whether or not those might be the cause of the issue that the firm is facing. Are those issues then controllable? And then from that, is the firm viable? We then try and stabilize and develop a strategy, looking at controlling the crisis, looking at cash management, making sure that there's cash flow, making sure that the bills are paid. Short-term financing is also a consideration. Also looking at new leadership. One of the things that might be needed in a turnaround is that new leadership needs to be brought in. It is always strongly advisable to advise those stakeholders of the situation. Let them know what's going on. Let the employees know. Let the suppliers know. Redefine what the core business is. Look at mergers and acquisitions. Consider divestment. Consider restructuring. Looking at organizational change. Do we need to change the staff? Do we need to improve our communication? And certainly the morale needs to have a look at to see whether or not we need to have a shot in the arm with the morale. And then, of course, financially restructuring the firm so that it is viable. And then we implement and monitor the changes. Moving on, captive company. Now, this is an interesting strategy here, this captive company. It happens two different ways. One way that it happens is that you have a small firm that might be a supplier to a larger firm. And what they've done is they've given up their independence and become a subsidiary of that larger firm willingly. They have said that as your fortunes grow, then our fortunes then will grow. And so they approach the larger firm and say, let's make a deal. We will be your subsidiary, make these parts for you, provide this material for you, and then we become part of your company. The other way that you have a captive company is that large companies will invest in R&D or other forms of innovation with smaller companies and actually then almost entrap them into relying on that larger company. And then at some point, they lure that smaller company into the larger company and become part of the larger company. 3M does this with their technology and offering huge R&D budgets for smaller firms. Divestment, it is a form of retrenchment. And it's a strategy to downsize the scope of the business. Now, it has been recommended by me that you guys consider your simulations and take a look at your business units to see if any of those business units need to be divested. If they're not generating any profit for you, if they're just costing you money, that is a strong candidate to divest that business unit if you want to do well in the simulation. Now, divestment then means that you're going to eliminate a portion of the business. You're either going to sell it, close it, spin it off, get rid of it. Now, there are examples out there of firms that have done divestment strategy. Ford, during 2008, when we had the economic downturn, they got rid of their crown jewels. They divested 4 major product lines: Land Rover, Jaguar, Aston Martin, and Volvo. They sold them off and focused on their core products. Google bought Motorola Mobile and then sold Motorola Mobile off. Well, that's an interesting strategy. Google doesn't make mistakes. Google is one of these companies out there that makes very good strategic decisions. So the question then would be, why would Google go out and spend all this money on Motorola Mobile and then turn around after a few years and sell it off? Well, the answer is Google wanted the technology to make cell phones. And that technology came from those patents that Motorola Mobile had. And now Google makes their own phones. Moving over to bankruptcy. Well, this is when you have a firm that is in an untenable competitive position. There are a few prospects and alternatives to improve. So the company then approaches the courts along with the creditors, and they work out an arrangement with them so that they can relieve the obligations that they have to the creditors over a period of time at some sort of agreed upon term and payment schedule. And once the firm has exited the bankruptcy, then they hopefully can get back into strong business performance. Well, we've got a couple of examples here of firms that have gone through bankruptcy. Sears for one, and Kodak for the other one. Now, Kodak did recover from bankruptcy. They are just focusing on a certain area of the market, and that's film for movie studios. But Sears is gone, so Sears is out of it. They're bankrupt there. Liquidation. This is the next step. Liquidation here is a termination of that company because it's too weak to be sold due to competitiveness in a highly competitive, unattractive industry. The only hope that the company has is to try and liquidate whatever assets might be remaining within that firm. Now, the only benefit that this has over bankruptcy is that the management retains the control and the decisions over those assets and how they're going to be collected and dispersed, whereas the bankruptcy court has the control over the bankruptcy. So we got 3 firms here that have gone through liquidation. You got Borders Bookstore, and you got Eckerd's Pharmacy, and you have Circuit City. Now, my question would be to you guys, why didn't Barnes & Noble buy up Borders? Why didn't they just acquire Borders Bookstore? Well, the answer is, why would they? What would be the purpose of doing that? If you are a current customer of Borders and Borders is going out of business and you're still interested in books, you're going to go to Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble picked up the customers and didn't have to pick up any of the liabilities that went along with Borders and the Borders stores. So they gained all that business and they didn't have to do anything to do that. Same thing with Circuit City. There was no reason for anyone to buy up Circuit City. The customers would just be absorbed into other firms. All right, we're going to be looking at portfolio analysis today. Excuse me, 2 of them. First one is called the BCG Matrix, Boston Consulting Group, and the other one is called the GE McKinsey. Both of these profile your business units, and with the BCG, it profiles your products as well, so that you can see them relative to each other and you can make informed decisions on what you might want to do with those business units or those products. Which ones are performing well, which ones are not. So it does evaluate the strength of the company's competitiveness within an industry or sector. And it helps to highlight those areas with potential and the most attractive future profits. So here we go, BCG matrix. It's based on the experience curve. The two variables that are measured here, market growth rate and relative market share. They create 4 different categories. And from these 4 categories, we can then determine a type of strategy the firm can pursue based on their alignment within these 4 categories based on these 2 variables. Now, with any kind of business, a business wants to have a combination of high growth products and low growth products. Low growth products are those products that don't require a lot of marketing and promotion and just continue to generate revenue. They're the ones that are the long established products. They keep just churning out that revenue for that firm, but there's not a lot of growth potential in them. On the other side, we want those with growth potential. We want those long-term earning ones. So we want to have a balanced portfolio. All right, high growth. Those are the ones that require resources and an effort to market, but they expect to generate substantial return on their investment. Low growth ones, they're well established. They continue to generate cash flow because the customers are familiar with buying them. So those are the 2 types of products that we're looking for in our product mix. As I mentioned, the BCG is measured on 2 variables, relative market share and industry growth rate. And those 2 variables then will create 4 quadrants. And in those quadrants, we can determine a type of strategy the firm should pursue. So relative market share, the way we calculate that is by looking at your firm's revenues and dividing your firm's revenues by the industry leaders' revenues. Okay, don't make a mistake on that. Your revenues by the industry leaders' revenues, not the full industry, the industry leader. Okay. So if your refrigerator industry was 25% of the revenues, I should say, and or the market leader was 25 and yours was 10, then your relative market share would be 40%. Relative market share is on the x-axis. Top left corner is set at 1, midpoint is 0.5, and the right corner is 0. So again, relative market share. So if company A had $100,000 in revenues and company B, the industry leader, had 200,000, then company A's relative market share would be 50%. Market growth rate. Now what we're looking at is the average growth rate of that market. And that goes in the center line of the BCG. Now, I've indicated here that the average growth rate is set at 10%, but it's not always. An industry might grow at 12, an industry might grow at 6, an industry might grow at 15. Whatever that industry average growth rate is, that's the center line. And then we plot your firm's growth rate relative to that industry average. So if the industry average is 15 and you're growing at 18, you're going to be above the center line. Okay, so let me give you a little example here. We've got 4 products. Remember, the BCG can be used for products and businesses. 4 products. The revenues of product 1, 500,000. The percent of corporate earnings is 54%. The largest competitor share is 25. Your brand's market share is 25. So the relative market share is 1. That means you are the market leader. Market growth rate is 3%. Second product, 350,000, 38% of the corporate earnings. 30% is the largest competitor share. Yours is 5, so your relative market share is 17. Market growth rate is 12. Third one, 50,000 in revenues. Percentage of corporate earnings is 6. Largest competitor share is 45. Yours is 30. So your relative market share is 67. And the market growth rate is strong at 13. And the last one, revenues are only 20,000. Corporate earnings, 2%. Largest competitor share is 10. Yours is 1. So you have a 10% relative market share. And the market growth rate is 3%. Now, when we plot this, since we're only looking at two things, we're only looking at the relative market share and the market growth rate. These are the only numbers that we need to plot into our matrix. And here's our matrix. So we have relative market share going from 0, meaning we have no market share, to 50% of the market, to 100, we are the industry leader. And our market growth rate going from 0 to 10% to 20%. Now, if we're looking at those previous sets of data, and we'll go back here. So business product number 1 had 100% market share, industry leader, and 3% growth rate. 3% growth rate going vertically and all the way over to the side, that's 100%. There's where our product number 1 is located. Product number 2, relative market share 17, market growth rate 12. Product number 2, relative market growth rate 12 and 17 for relative market share. There we are over here. Number 3, 67 for relative market share and 13 for growth rate. That's a strong one. 67 over here and 13 here. There's product number 3. And the last one, 10% relative market share and 3% growth. Well, relative market share 10% down here, 3% growth. And you notice that in each one of these quadrants, there are recommended strategies for that firm to pursue. So now what we have based on your market share and the growth rate, we can recommend some strategies if you're positioned in these quadrants. So if you are in quadrant 3 here, the star, you can follow any aggressive strategy, backward, forward integration, market penetration, market development, product development, any aggressive strategy. You have a strong market position and the market is growing. Now over here on the right-hand side, this is question mark. We can go market penetration, market development, product development. But you notice we got divestiture in here. So we got 3 growth and 1 divestiture. Now the reason for that divestiture is this, is the relative market share. So even though the market is growing, we may not have a product that is doing well in the market. And as such, the recommendation would be divest. However, if we do have a product in the marketplace, and even though we have a small relative market share, these strategies will work. Now, a caution here is this. If you're following a strategy that is differentiation, Ferrari, Rolls-Royce, you're not going to have a large relative market share compared to GM and Ford. You're going to have a small relative market share. That does not mean you're not profitable. So you have to have a caution here when you see that your relative market share is low, but the growth rate is high. You have to consider what's the strategy of that firm. Are they following a differentiation strategy where they're specializing in a small market. Next area. This would be the cash cow down here. This is that strong relative market share, 100%, but the market is not growing. So it's got low growth rate. So now what we can do is we can do product development. We can do diversification. We can also retrench and divest, because remember, if the market has got a small growth rate, it typically means that that market is mature and it's going to start at some point slipping over into decline. So you want to be ready if it's doing that for retrench or divest. Last one, very easy on this one. You have no market share and there's no growth rate. You're in a bad market with no market share. Retrench, divest, liquidate, get out. All right. That then is the BCG. Let's take a look at some benefits of the BCG and some drawbacks of that. Well, advantages. It's quantifiable. It's easy to remember. Easy identifiers. It encourages those decision makers to evaluate each of the firm's businesses or products. And from that, you can set objectives and you can allocate resources. The only disadvantage to this, it doesn't work well with high turbulence industries. So it only works well with turbulence levels 1, 2, and 3. Growth rate is only one aspect of industry attractiveness. A low growth rate doesn't mean that the industry is not attractive. Market share is only one aspect of overall competitive position. Example was Ferrari and Rolls-Royce. Just because you have a low market share doesn't mean you don't have a strong competitive position. It has been argued that high and low are too simplistic to form categories. And lastly, the relationship between market share and profitability is debatable. Having large market share doesn't always translate to high profitability. So some advantages and disadvantages to the BCG. Let's take a look at the GE McKinsey. It is similar to the BCG matrix, but this one adds a little bit more dimensions to it. Now we're doing a 3x3. This is a 9-cell. And our two variables that we're using here are industry attractiveness and business unit strength. So now we're looking at whether or not the industry in which we are competing is attractive. And we can measure that with variables. And we're looking at our business unit to determine whether or not our business unit is strong. And we can measure that with variables too. The other thing that this particular matrix provides, it shows us the size of the market and what portion of that market we occupy. And that's indicated by a pie and a pie slice. And lastly, it shows movement, whether or not the industry is getting stronger or the business unit is getting stronger or weaker. So this shows quite a bit of movement. Now, this particular matrix was developed by McKinsey Group for GE. GE wanted to see, of all their business units, how they would then be placed relative to each other when it comes to performance so that they could make decisions. All right, here's how we do this. We're going to be looking at measuring the industry attractiveness and the business unit's strength, relative performance. So we're going to select some factors that will determine whether or not an industry is attractive and whether or not a business unit is strong. So we're going to select these factors, and I'll show you them in a second. And we're going to give them a weighted value, And then what we're going to do is we're going to rate how well that firm is doing on those particular factors. And that factor rating goes from 1, poor, 2.5, average, and 4, excellent. And of course, anywhere in between there, you can also use numbers, 1.5 to 2.25, 2.75, all the way down that way. So here are some examples of factors that would be used for both industry attractiveness and also the business unit's relative performance. All right, business unit strength. What kind of market share does the business unit have? Does it have a large market share? That would be an indication of business unit strength. If it has a large market share, you could consider that a strength. Now, on the other hand here, you see I got market niche on there. This would then be for those companies that are following a differentiation strategy. Ferrari, Rolls-Royce, do they have a strong market niche? And if so, that would be a strong business strength. What about their access to distribution channels? Is it unlimited? Do they have growth in market share? That would be an indication of strength. Do they have good production capacity? Does the company have brand equity? What about the profit margin of this company relative to the others? Is it higher? If so, that's a strength. What about cash equivalent, and supply chain management? Those are just a few. I have more that I'll show you here in just a second. On the other side, industry attractiveness. Is the industry growing? What's the size of that industry? Is there within that industry a lot of variability in demand? We don't like that. We want consistent demand. We don't like the ups and downs. We want to have consistency. What about profitability? Is the industry profitable? Are there a lot of rivals? Now, some rivals are good. Too many rivals are bad. What about global opportunities? Are there opportunities for growth in this industry globally? And then what about the macro environmental factors? Will they have an effect on this industry? Will this industry be affected by political, social, by environmental, by economic, by technological? And if those macro environmental forces are strong, the industry may not be as attractive. So we have to consider those as well, especially if we're looking at global opportunities. All right, so here then is how we go about looking at this. We're going to be plotted then in 3 different areas, 3 different zones on this 9-cell matrix. The 3 zones are invest, manage, and harvest. If we're located in the invest side, that means we have a strong or an average business unit that is in an attractive industry and strong business units in an average industry. We can invest. That would be an aggressive strategy. In the managed section, that means we have an average business unit in an average industry or a strong business unit in a weak industry and a weak business unit in an attractive industry. So now we just manage that. We see how it develops, and then we determine from other analysis whether or not we want to make a strong investment or maybe harvest. And then the last one, harvest. Now we have a weak business unit in an average industry and an unattractive industry and an average business unit in an unattractive industry. All right, so here is how we fill out the GE McKinsey. There's going to be 2 different forms, parts of this that you need. The first part is your data. The first part determines your values. So you can see here under industry attractiveness, I only have 5 factors out there, and that's all you really need. But the ones that I'm looking at are really important. We got market growth rate. That is certainly a determinant of industry attractiveness. Whether or not that industry has global opportunities, whether or not that industry has a lot of rivals, the profitability of that industry, and also the size. Now, with each of these factors, we gave them a value relative to each other. And it looks like global opportunities is the one that has the most value here for this industry. And then we have industry profitability, a little bit less, 0.15. And now what we're rating is this industry. So don't confuse this now. This is the industry in which your firm is competing. You're rating the industry, not the firm now. The firm is the next section. So in this particular industry, you got excellent growth rate, excellent global opportunities, excellent competitive rivalry. In other words, the rivalry is not high. Market size is excellent and above average industry profitability. We take the weight times the rate, we get a weighted score, 3.85. That's a good score out of 4. Business unit strength. Now we're looking at, again, market share, market niche, production capacity. Are we growing in this market share? What's our profit margin and our brand image? And then we've given these weights as well. Looks like profit margin and market share, market niche are the most important areas. Now the business unit as well is doing strong. They have all 4s and 3s as well. And the total weighted score then for the business unit side is a 3.7. So simply we take the 3.85 and the 3.7, and we're going to plot it onto our matrix. 3.85, 3.7, we're right up here. We would follow an invest strategy for that firm. Now you notice on this matrix, we've got some more data. Remember, I mentioned to you the pie and the pie slice. Well, this particular size of the market here is smaller than this market down here. So I put 2 of them on here just for comparison. We only did 1, that was this one. This one here is just for comparison. So what we're seeing here is that this market size is smaller than this market size. But we have 35% of this market, and we only have 15% of this market. And you notice the arrow. The arrow here shows direction, and it's showing direction of both the industry attractiveness and the business unit strength. So if the arrow is going up, that means our business unit is getting stronger, and the arrow is. And if the arrow is going to the side, to the left, that means the industry is becoming stronger, and it is. So in this particular case, this particular market is not only getting stronger, the industry, but also the business unit is getting stronger. Now down here, you notice that the arrow is going up, but it's going to the right. So the industry is becoming less attractive. So my question to you would be this: why then would the arrow, or why then would the industry become less attractive, but the business unit is becoming stronger? All right, let me tell you why. Think about a declining industry. Okay, remember the characteristics of a declining industry. You have those in the industry that are exiting the industry. They're leaving the industry. They're either going out of business, or they're selling out, or they're just whatever it is, they're getting out. So the industry, because it is a decline industry, is getting weaker. But because there are fewer competitors in the industry, the business unit is getting stronger. So when we look at things like this, we need to also take a look at the industry life cycle. Where is that? What's going on in the industry life cycle? What other types of analysis tools do we have available that can help explain to us why this position is where it is? All right. So advantages. It considers more variables, leads to a better decision, more robust decision. The way you determine attractiveness can be done in several ways, allowing you to pick those best factors for determining industry attractiveness and business unit strength. You pick those particular factors. The disadvantages, this can be complicated, can be burdensome. There has been some argument that the numerical estimates of the industry attractiveness and business unit strength can be rather objective. But they are really, if you look at having some awareness of what's going on in that industry, you should be able to get a good idea of whether or not it's performing well or not well. New products, new business units in a developing industry, they're not going to be accurately positioned. We don't have enough longitudinal data on that. And it doesn't represent that there might be interaction between various business units that might be, creating synergies and making one more attractive or more strong than the other one. So there are then some limitations to the GE McKinsey. All right, so that is where we're going to stop today. And I am going to